Decollibus. All right, welcome to another episode of Bro History. On today's show, I have Danny, of course, and we have a special guest, Adam Decollibus. I pronounced that right, correct?
Yeah, you got it, man.
And
Nailed it.
Adam is the author, and he self-published this book, of a historical novel called Caravan. Adam, how's it going, man? Thanks for joining.
It's going terrific, man. Going awesome. Can't complain.
How's life treating you right now, man? How's the Cali weather?
Dude, it's been raining a bunch. I'm not gonna say it's all sunshine and rainbows, but a whole lot better in Chicago, man. I have a buddy who used to live up in Chicago. He was telling me that back over there it's just like swamped with snow. So I'm grateful, man.
Dude, I heard it was like negative 20 degrees the other day in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the warm day.
That was the warm day.
Right.
Yeah, I think some of it got like as low as negative 40, which just doesn't even sound real.
Dude, that's colder than Mars.
Which hopefully...
It's like, how could you start your car?
That's like Alaska weather. Not Alaska weather, Antarctica weather. It's Arctic Circle weather. But Adam has a new book, man. Like, tell us about your book. Tell us about Caravan.
Sure thing, man. So Caravan is a story about a man from England who takes a caravan across the desert to photograph the people, the culture, and the desert for a magazine. And while he's traveling across the desert, he becomes obsessed with the silence that he finds in the desert, because up until this point in his life, he's never had real freedom. He's never had full control over his life. And now that he's been sort of dislodged from his life, dislodged from his old pattern of living, he's able to look at the life that he's been living, and he realizes that there is so much more to life, and he can live the life that he wants to live. And because of this realization, he has to decide whether he's going to, at the end of his journey, return to London, or if he's going to break the rules and stay in the desert.
That's awesome, man. And as I understand it, the book is set during a very specific time period. Am I right?
Yeah. So it's set in the 20s, just after World War II. Excuse me, just after World War One.
Can you explain like the historical background behind that? Like, why is it set then? Why is that important for the story? Things like that.
Yeah, I wanted to choose that timeline because I thought it would be a really interesting moment to choose from, because at that point, the culture and society in the world was going through a massive change, and a lot of it had to do with the First World War. So, for instance, PTSD was beginning to be discovered. Warfare had completely changed. Basically, the rest of the 21st century was drawn out from the First World War. That started the Second World War. That started the Cold War. It started a lot of things that kicked off huge historical moments. But why I chose it in particular for that moment is because I wanted to capture the feeling of just the largeness of the conflict. How no matter where he traveled, there were people that had lost somebody, or they knew somebody who fought in the war. And overall, it's just a era that I really like to study about and learn and write about.
How'd you get interested in like post World War One?
So I'm a big history nut. I like to listen to podcasts, and that's like the main way I get through history
right?
stuff. And so I was going through this one podcast. It's called Hardcore History with Dan Carlin. If you guys know,
dude,
bro,
Hardcore History is the inspiration of this podcast, man. I'm a Dan Carlin. I swear to God, man, I'm obsessed with Hardcore History. That's Carlin's awesome. The greatest. And I'm assuming that you listen to the Blueprint for Armageddon, right?
Yes.
That's his World War One podcast?
Yeah.
That podcast is about 36 hours long. Each episode has about 4 episodes. There's 6 episodes. Each one's about 3 to 4 to 5 hours long. And I listened to the whole thing in like a 2-week period. And you feel like garbage after, because it's so depressing, but it's so good. It's one of the best podcasts ever, along with his other ones. But that's kind of funny, because like that was one of the inspirations for me to want to start doing history podcasting, the follow in Dan Carlin's footsteps. Like anyone can actually follow in Dan Carlin's footsteps.
Really big shoes to fill, yeah.
Yeah, I mean the guy's a complete master. But I can see how you can get inspired by the description and the chaos, and how he narrates story in Hardcore History.
Yeah. So that podcast had a lot to do with it, and the film Lawrence of Arabia actually had a lot to do with it as well. I just thought that era in that area, so post World War One in the desert, was an area. Was a topic that isn't mentioned that often, and I thought it'd be really interesting to write a book in that time period in that area. And after I heard the podcast, I knew, okay, for sure, it's going to be right after World War One, because World War One, it was, after you hear the podcast, as you know, bro, it was crazy. It was wild. Like, we went from doing cavalry charges to camouflage and machine guns in like 5 years. Like, that is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was super interesting. And yeah, him and Lawrence of Arabia were the two largest impacts on me choosing post World War One.
No one's ever seen anything like this. It was just meat being thrown on meat into the meat grinder.
You do a good impression.
Dude, that's super interesting, man. It is a really interesting time period, especially like he starts off in like Gallipoli, and then he goes off and he kind of goes into the Western Front from there. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It is kind of a forgotten time. Most people don't really know or read about the early modern history of the Middle East. So super cool that you kind of grabbed your inspiration from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man.
What were some of the more like interesting things that you learned in doing your research for the book about that time period, or more specifically that region in that time period?
Well, now this is what I learned by going through the book, and I'm definitely going to apply more in my future novels, is when I wrote the first draft, I did little to no research. So yeah, for
right
real.
Off the dome, huh?
Right off the dome. So
that sounds like our podcast episodes.
Just wing it. Yeah, man. Second draft into it, I realized, okay, it'd be good to do some research. And that's when I started reading about Lawrence of Arabia. And the thing that I thought that was really interesting, the little tidbit that I learned that struck me the most, was the agreement that the British and the French had, how after the war ended, they were just going to carve up the Middle East. And the Arab tribes had no idea. I thought that was pretty ruthless. And yeah, that was a pretty important thing I learned along the way.
Yeah, Sykes-Picot.
Yeah.
Picot.
I wonder if that's where the term psych came from.
Psych.
No, maybe. That's a good point. I never actually thought about that, but yeah,
that's British some bro history for you right there.
The British just overpromised all the tribes there. They overpromised all the Arab tribes there, and they bartered off land that they didn't actually own, and then they ended up screwing everyone over. And then at the very end, I mean, they let the French basically take over or invade Damascus at the end. But yeah, it's a super interesting story. And Lawrence of Arabia is with Peter O'Toole and who else is in Lawrence of Arabia? Obi-Wan Kenobi. Alex
Ewan
Guinness.
McGregor?
No, not Ewan McGregor. The original Obi-Wan Kenobi's in it. Alec Guinness.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have Alec Guinness. Omar Sharif, I think, is in there too, or that might be the name of one of the characters. Omar Sharif is in there. Yeah, that's an awesome movie. If you guys have seen it, then you know.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about Lawrence of Arabia. I'm sure that there are plenty of people that are watching or listening that don't know anything about Lawrence of Arabia. Maybe you can tell us like a brief synopsis of who Lawrence of Arabia was and why he was important in history.
So yeah, well, I'll tell you about Lawrence himself, and then I'll tell you about the movie, because I love both just as much. So Lawrence of Arabia, as a person, he was basically the original Indiana Jones. Like, this guy was awesome. He was an archaeologist who spent a lot of time in the Middle East before World War I broke out. So he knew the area really well, and he was involved in archaeology. Then, when the war broke out, the British contacted him, and they wanted him to serve as a spy. They wanted him to track the railroad activity of the Turks and just give them a really good layout of what was happening because he was the most knowledgeable guy. Well, when the war broke out, he signed up for the military, but they gave him just like a regular job as working for the intelligence. And as the war progressed, they decided to send him to talk to this Arab prince, and Arab prince who was in control of a lot of the tribes over there, because they wanted to get the Arab tribes to help them fight the Turks. And it's his life story is almost perfect for a movie because and even on a story level, it progresses at such a perfect level. Just each little challenge leads to him gaining a little bit more and progressing. So he goes to the prince. Eventually, he leads a attack on Aqaba, which is it was a Turkish-held city that the British just couldn't take over, but it was essential. It was essential for the British. So he took it over, and that led to him basically being in control of all the espionage warfare that was happening over there against the Turks. And that's sort of his life story. Also, there's we talked a little bit about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the French and the British made a secret agreement where after the war they were going to carve up the Middle East. Even though they had promised if I got this right, even though they had promised the Arab tribes that if they helped, they could get their own land and establish their own country. Well, in real life, and this is one of the major differences between real life and the movie. In real life, T.H. Lawrence knew about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and he was basically leading the Arabs to their doom. He was betraying them, even though he was helping out the British. So, at the end of the war, I don't know if the Sykes-Picot Agreement actually did it actually go through.
That's
yeah,
you,
but
Henry.
it did, but there was like also, well, it didn't, not exactly, because the original Sykes-Picot, Russia was involved as well, and they were supposed to actually split Persia from north and south. The Russians were going to get southern Persia. I mean, no, the Russians were going to get northern Persia, and the British were going to get southern Persia, because that's where their oil concessions were. But
Gotcha.
the Soviet Empire ended up, not the Soviet Empire, the Russian Empire ended up turning into the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was like, no, we don't want any part of this. So they ended up, Sykes-Picot didn't really go according to plan. But there were other agreements later that split up the Middle East into what we see today. And of course, there was like revolutions and stuff after that with the monarchs they set up, because I mean, what they did is they took those, they took King Faisal and different tribes, and they set them up as kings, and they ended up not really lasting that long.
Yeah,
democracy came for them, but not really democracy.
You mean when the Western world sets up, people in the Arab countries to be kings and monarchs, it doesn't work out in the end?
I don't know. Why don't you ask the Shah of Iran?
I'm sure he wouldn't know anything about that, would he?
No, he passed away in the 70s. But no, that's a really interesting concept, man. It's crazy that I'm not sure how old are you. I think you're younger than me or younger than us. It's crazy how you got interested in that. I don't really know anyone who's even close to my age who's really interested in the Middle East. Like, I need to speak to people who are like 10 years older than me to have a conversation about anything Middle East related, or it's especially like the history of World War I and like, early 19th century Middle Eastern history. So how did you get interested in that subject? Was it just from studying World War I?
It was through Lawrence of Arabia and studying World War I. To be honest, it's not too grand of a way to get into that area of history, but yeah, just those two sources really got me interested into it. And as a writer, I really like thinking about areas of history where people don't touch on too much. So if it were to be World War I, people would always think of the Western Front, in the trenches and everything like that. and I liked how there was actually a movie made on the Middle East. So I like to think about areas of history or of events where people don't think about too much. Um, so, for instance, like right now, one thing I've been thinking about a lot, and you guys probably know way more about this than me right now. I've been thinking about the war that Russia had with Afghanistan in the 80s. I thought
Oh
about it,
yeah.
yeah, just a couple weeks ago, and I started doing some research on it, and it's like, wow, it's like, okay, that was their version of Vietnam. And once you put
Yeah.
that into context, it's like, wow, there's so much story potential there as a writer. So I just like focusing on areas of history that don't get touched on too much. And once you focus on that, as you guys know, it kind of helps complete the whole historical picture.
Well, Sylvester Stallone, he beat you to the punch. Rambo 3.
Oh, no way. Oh God. Well, hey man.
I'm joking. I'm joking, man.
Yeah,
I'm joking,
I
man.
know.
That's a really interesting. That's an interesting topic that no one really knows about. The in the words of Danny Jerison, who we interviewed, if you haven't listened to it, I recommend listening to our Danny Jerison interview. He's a combat veteran. He was an active duty major who served in Afghanistan. His exact words were, "The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan makes the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan look like child's play." About a million Pashtuns were killed. The whole country was in ruin. There was a civil war afterwards. It's a really interesting topic. You ever read the book? You ever read? Why is this book escaping my name right now? Because I used to love it so much. Kite Rider, not Kite Rider. 1,000 Splendid Summers.
No.
And why is this escaping my head right now?
You about to talk about the graveyard?
No. Oh yeah, the Graveyard of Empires. That's what Afghanistan is called.
Huh.
That's the nickname for Afghanistan, the Graveyard of Empires. But no, that's a really good setting. How did you get interested in that? Like, was there a movie? Was there anything? Did you read anything about it?
Let's see. Yeah, so I was reading, still am, the book version of the movie Red Sparrow, and in the book version there was a guy who served in Afghanistan on the Russian side, and I'd heard a little bit about it, but I thought it would have been interesting to get into it, so just started doing some research, and yeah, man, like you said, it's full scale invasion, man. It's crazy.
Charlie Wilson's War covers it too. You ever see that?
Sorry, one more time.
Charlie Wilson's War.
No.
It's with Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks.
It's with Tom. It's a sequel to Toy Story. No, it's
sequel to Toy Story. Prequel to Toy Story.
It's a prequel. Yeah. It's a prequel to Toy Story. Tom Hanks plays Charlie Wilson, who was a congressman who was. It was kind of his war to fund these madrasas in Afghanistan to fight against the Soviets. He was working. The movie is about him working with the Saudis and creating these madrasas in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. So it's kind of a funny movie too. It's kind of a dark comedy, but it's revolved around a very serious subject. I'd recommend it for inspiration. Charlie Wilson's War. There's some really funny scenes in it.
I'm gonna write that down right now, man. That's awesome.
I don't want to say Meryl Streep's in it too. I don't know. I might be speaking out of my ass right now. However, Charlie Wilson's War, there's like this. I'm not going to spoil any scenes, but there's some really good scenes in that movie. Yeah. But yeah, it's a super interesting topic, man. What would you say? And Danny, you should ask him at context as well. Like, what do you think? What's your favorite historical movie or period piece?
Ooh, favorite historical. That's rough. Probably either have to go with Lawrence of Arabia or Gladiator with Russell Crowe.
I do love Gladiator.
How can you not love Gladiator?
Ridley Scott, such a good director.
So the child is like, father of a murdered son, husband of a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance.
That's
Russell Crowe at his best. It's one of my favorite movies, and that's the most badass monologue of all time.
In the
Danny, do you concur?
Yeah, I'd agree.
You can't see Danny's face right now, Adam, but Danny's shaking his head. Yeah, I agree. It was a good one.
And the soundtrack too.
No, Gladiator, dude.
Oh yeah,
soundtrack is awesome. And that siren will be filtered out. Danny just can't talk for the next. Danny's on mute, or at least he knows he's on mute because the siren's going to pass in the background. But I probably shouldn't be talking about the siren because this will be recorded. However,
don't talk about the siren. That's the first rule about the podcast. You know, it's funny. The funny thing is that like we're in New York City. You know,
Sweet.
I'm in Brooklyn, and you know, Henry's on almost in Harlem, like Upper East Side. But in either case, there are constant like sirens that go by, and sometimes they happen at like the most inopportune times. And some of the feedback that we got when we started the podcast was always like, yeah, you know, content's really great. You know, you guys sound good, but can you do something about the goddamn sirens? The answer is no, we can't do anything about the sirens, but we've gotten pretty good at editing them out whenever possible. So that's why I got really quiet when one was going by, because, you know, I could just cut it out later.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I just spill the beans and I'm just like, oh, the sirens. Yeah. Gladiator's a badass movie. So I have some kind of mixed controversial opinions about some movies that I loved when I was younger.
Okay. Go for it.
I used to really love Braveheart. I don't like it as much as I used to. I rewatched it and I still liked it, but I don't know if it. I wasn't sure if it held the test of time. I don't know. What's your opinion on that? Or have you seen Braveheart? I guess that should be the first question.
Oddly enough, I kind of share the exact same views you do. As a kid, I grew up watching that movie too. So yeah, when you go back and you rewatch it, it is different. I don't know. It does change though. Maybe it's just as you change as a person. Maybe your perspective on the movie sort of changes with it. But I don't know. I still enjoy it, but I definitely enjoyed it a lot more back then.
I was just going to say that it's probably twinged by the fact that we've all realized that Mel Gibson is a bigot.
Or we just know. It could have something to do with it.
Maybe.
Here's the thing. So I actually like Mel Gibson as a director a lot. I think
the Passion of the Christ.
My favorite Passion of the Christ. No, my favorite film from him is Apocalypto.
Oh,
that was actually awesome. A pretty good movie. Yeah, that was a pretty good movie.
Yeah.
My personal favorite, I think one of the ones that really stuck out for me was Hotel Rwanda, because before that movie came out, I didn't even know that was a thing that happened, and if I'm not mistaken, it happened in our lifetimes. So the fact that this mass genocide happened within our lifetime, like, you know, you grow up learning about like the Holocaust, for example, that's like the premier genocide that you learn about. And then this happens in Darfur. You know, it's just like I'd never even heard of that country before. And Don Cheadle did a fucking great job in that movie. So,
have you guys seen Beasts of No Nation?
What's that about?
It's about child soldiers in I guess a fictional country in Africa. I think it's supposed to be Nigeria, but they never specifically name it. It's with the guy from The Wire, Idris Elba. I'm terrible. I'm really
Idris Elba.
Idris Elba. Is with him. It is a very, very good film. The guy who directed the first season of True Detective directed this film.
Oh wow!
If you guys are a fan of True Detective at all.
Nope.
Adam, to give you, since you can't see Adam, Danny's just shaking his head like, what's True Detective?
I've heard about it, but
it's really good. All right, I'll throw another one out there. Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, fuck yeah. That's a good ass movie.
No, man, Danny's got it right.
That first
that movie's great.
That first 15 minutes, that first 20 minutes is like nothing I've ever seen in my life. As far as just war choreography or how they did that. That was intense. And I watched that film when I was like 10 years old.
Yeah,
nine or
yeah.
10
got
years old.
PTSD, man.
Whatever.
I remember
I
being
watched
very
it when
like
it came out.
being very anxious about the whole thing. It's like, oh shit, oh shit. Same. I got the same response out of Black Hawk Down. That movie just stressed me out like nothing else.
Black Hawk Down was good, man. Black Hawk Down is. I've talked to a lot of guys who've served in the military, and they cite like Black Hawk Down was like a movie that made them really interested in joining the army and getting recruited for the army.
Interested. It did the exact opposite to me. I was like, fuck that. I'm not going in that war zone.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess it has different effects, but I could see how you could become like, oh man, this is like a family unit and adventure and fighting and is crazy. I think Danny Jerson said that he saw that movie. That was a big impact on him going into the military. But
I mean, good on him. Thank you for his service.
Black Hawk Down was really, really good. Now here's a recent war movie that I watched and I thought it was bad. And we're going back to Mel Gibson. I think I've told Danny this before, but have you seen Hacksaw Ridge?
Yeah.
No, I didn't see that one yet.
Sorry. Go ahead. I did. I didn't know who the question was for.
Oh, open question. I did not like Hacksaw Ridge. I don't know. So I'll give you my reason and you can tell me if you agree or not. But I thought Hacksaw Ridge was like fetishizing gore. Like it went from this movie that was basically like kind of like it was a movie that was trying to make a political statement on freedom of religion. It was the first hour of that film there's no combat. It's all like a political statement about religious freedom in America. Because he's a pacifist and he refused to pick up a weapon, so they were going to court-martial him. But then he got off the hook at the end to serve in a medic, and then that movie just switches into like a Rob Zombie style gore fest. Like it's gorier than any war film I've ever seen in my life. Like we're talking about exaggerated violence of where people's heads are being exploded off like a Quentin Tarantino film, and I was like, this is just like odd. Like this is an odd. This is really odd. Like I thought I was watching a Hallmark movie. And then it just totally switched into The Hills Have Eyes in a matter of 10 minutes. And I know it's like a war. It's a war film. But then I read up on like some of the historical inaccuracies, and I know it's impossible when you're adapting true history into a film or novel or whatever to get everything accurate. You got to exaggerate and make the story juicy. But I saw that they took a lot of stuff out of context as far as like them, the big part of the scene with Hacksaw Ridge was them climbing up this ridge that in the film, it looked like it was like 30 yards up. And like in reality, it was like 10 yards high. Like it wasn't that big or wasn't as big as they made it out to in the film. They like exaggerated on and how long or they kind of cut his service short. Like they kind of packed his entire military career into one day, which is fair enough. Like it's a war film and you're trying to spell out a story. But I know it always kind of hits me when you kind of read like, all right, well, how true was this? And then you find it wasn't. Not to take away from the guy's service because the guy was an absolute hero. But I don't know. The film didn't do it for me. And I'll add one more thing in my critique. I thought it was overbearing with the Mel Gibson like subliminal like Catholic messages, and I'm Catholic myself. However, there's like a cross everywhere in the background, like the medic, the cover of Hacksaw Ridge. There's like a medic badge. There's a medic cross on his helmet, and you can tell it's a cross. There's a scene where he's bathing himself like after the night out in the combat zone, and there's almost like a baptism scene. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I know that was a mouthful.
Well, Henry, you brought up a really good point, and then you started rambling on for a minute, which is in true bro history fashion. You brought up a good point that I want to ask Adam, and that's the idea of adapting historical, basically history to film and books and media, and with this Hacksaw Ridge, as Henry points out, there's a lot of inaccuracies and there's a lot of exaggerations. What are, as an author of a historical novel, what are some of your thoughts and opinions on, the historical fiction and like how the history should be represented in the story, and like maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how you blended both history and fiction together for your book.
Well, first thing I think that you have to think about as creators, that you have to think about two things. You have to think about, one, your intent. Okay, am I trying to make something that is telling the story in a way that could be a little bit fictionalized? It could be um, almost biographical, but it could tell a story from a bunch of different perspectives. Like a good movie that I think does that is We Were Soldiers. Um, that one was good. I thought that one had a really good adaptation of the historical events, because it was pretty accurate. You got a feel of what was happening. The explosions weren't too big, but at the same time, it was entertaining. So I think that you have to just understand what your intention is. Like, okay, am I going to make this? Am I just getting this time period solely for its entertainment value, or am I trying to tell a story? Second thing you have to take into account is, you are making historical fiction, so you do have history, you do have fiction. So, yeah, it's just kind of picking and choosing what you want to put in. As far as books and movies that I think have done it well, I think, like I said, We Were Soldiers did a really good job. And like even Braveheart. So Braveheart is super inconsistent. Like even they have the years wrong. They have like the king, the English king. He's from like a different era, right? It's And if you look at the director, he in an interview, I think he said that we're just trying to tell an interesting story. And I think he's the same director that did We Were Soldiers, if I'm not correct. And when he went to
Braveheart,
if I'm right, I'm not sure though. I could be totally wrong.
I think Mel Gibson directed Braveheart. I think Mel Gibson directed Braveheart.
You're right. Yeah. He did.
I think that was his. I think it was his first film, or maybe he had another film, but it was his first like blockbuster.
Yeah.
At least.
Then I don't know who I'm thinking about.
Mel Gibson's just like, I want to make sword fighting.
Somebody's head is gonna get cut off.
I want to put paint on my face and ride a horse.
Can I get away with killing a horse?
It's like, man, I just want to have long hair.
What are the legal ramifications if I kill this horse?
It'd be horrible if we found out like no special effects were used and just a ton of extras just got slayed. That'd be sad.
I've heard
they put those disclaimers.
They used to do that back in the day. They used to sacrifice animals basically in the spirit of making films back in like the 20s and 30s, which is like horrifying.
That's legit.
To that point, though, not dead animal point, but to your previous point, Adam, you talked about like mixing different perspectives, and as I'm reading through the book and through the synopsis of your story, the main character actually comes across quite a few different people from different backgrounds in the desert. Who all had this shared experience of World War I. Tell me a little bit about how you developed those characters, and like how much of it was like fiction and stuff that you just came up with off the dome, and like how much were you inspired by, say, other characters from other either historical figures or fiction or anything like that. Can you talk to me about the dynamics of the different people that he meets in the desert?
So just as a whole of the group of people that he meets throughout the story, one thing that I really wanted to capture is just the broadness of the types of people that you'll meet. So in my life, I've done quite a bit of traveling, and I've learned, no matter where you're going to go, you're going to meet people who like you, and you meet people who don't. You're going to meet good people, and you're going to meet bad people, no matter where you go. So you can go anywhere. So one of the things that I've wanted to establish is that there are good people where you want to expect them, and the same with bad people, right? So there's a real broadness of characters, and I think that through a storytelling perspective, this is where some books or movies can get a little bit flawed. It can seem like everybody just likes the main character, everybody gets along with them, and everything just goes, smooth. That's as a gut feeling as a writer, that's just where you want to go. That's sort of the comfort zone, because conflict is just it's difficult, but it's very entertaining to write or to film. So, God, I forgot where I was going with that sentence. But just to answer your question, I got the inspiration I originally had for the main character was sort of like this Clark Gable kind of character, and who was sort of like this macho guy. And then what happened, and this is before I finished the book, I viewed Lawrence of Arabia, and halfway as I was watching the movie, I stopped halfway and I thought, holy shit, right? T. Lawrence is my character. He is William. He is the guy that I'm trying to portray. So I realized I had his identity wrong, and I molded a lot of his identity after Peter O'Toole's portrayal of Lawrence of Arabia. So yeah, that had a large effect on the main character. And in the rest of the characters that I wrote, I just wanted to portray a realness to them. So they're, some have a good side, some have a bad side. They have flaws. And yeah, that's just what I hope to portray through the story.
Very Game of Thrones of you. Very J.R.R. Martin.
Characters build the plot, man. It could be anywhere. It could be on the plot. I mean, the setting can be on the moon. Well, actually, that would be pretty cool as well. However, I mean, that's a really cool setting. Just post World War I desert. Like, do you have a specific country that they're in, or
they're
is
traveling,
it like a fictional?
They're traveling, so they start in Morocco, and they're going to go all the way across Nigeria and across all those countries, all the way to Yemen, where he's going to take a boat back to London. So it's based off of real countries, but as far as the research goes, like, that's another thing I could have done better with the research, because I'm a guy who at least it's just part of my personality. I love facts. Like, I love to see the numbers. So when I'm going through and I'm researching something, I just see story. So next book I write, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to do a crazy amount of research, because that'll basically do most of these story ideas for me, because I just get story ideas out of history and out of events that have happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much history and there's so many interesting characters. I mean, just throughout our entire human history, it's when you read diaries and stuff like that, when you read direct sources, you're just like, wow, this is like, can be a movie in itself. Like, there doesn't even have to be any added drama to it. Especially in that era, that World War I era, there's so many fascinating stories. There's so many diaries. There's an overwhelming amount of diaries that come from the soldiers of World War I. I don't know if you've seen the new. I haven't seen this yet, but I'm wondering. I don't know if I don't think Danny's seen it either. But that Peter Jackson, he recreated film archives from World War I, like actual film, and he colorized it, and then he put audio behind it, and he sped up the frames, or he fixed the frame so it looks like it's real, just based off like the commercials I've seen and just the trailers. Looks absolutely fascinating. The guy literally fired weapons from the World War I era that matched the audio, so it would sync in the film. So he would fire like an old M1,
like an old howitzer or something like that.
Yeah, an old howitzer or whatever the tank that they used back in World War I. Was it Abrams?
No,
that's too new.
Yeah, that's too new. What was the tank? I forget the tank, but they would fire the actual weapons, which is cool, which is crazy when you think about it, how much effort they put into recreating that film.
I wonder if they put that much effort into those like video games. Like, I really love Battlefield 1, and if we're on the World War I topic, that was set in World War I, and it's fun to run around in, and you get all the old guns and all the old tanks and all the old vehicles and shit. I wonder if they actually go back and do the same, or are they completely fictionalized?
No, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they and they're a game like Battlefield 4, was that the World War I?
Battlefield 1.
Battlefield 1. I'm sure they're using the real weapons from that era
probably still
to recreate the sound. I mean, those budgets are those budgets are like 200 million, not two. Yeah, but I would say like,
I mean, it's a AAA game, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hundreds of
millions.
The
budget's huge. Of course they can afford it. It's probably the budget for those video games are way more than the budget that Peter Jackson used to recreate old archive
Dude,
film from World War One.
Imagine if he had the same.
I don't know what the budget was.
Bro, we would be.
That'd be an interesting one.
He just recreate all of Lord of the Rings movie.
That would be great.
He would just do another Lord of the Rings film.
Either that, or he'd be forced to do another Lord of the Rings movie because that's the only way he'd make enough money back to the investors.
Hey man, you can't sell that intellectual property. I guarantee you, they're going to remake that film in within the next 20 years.
I'll watch it,
dude.
Maybe not guarantee, but I think they will. I bet they add some weird sequel or do like a soft reboot with like new characters with the same.
I want to see more of Sauron. I want to see more of Sauron. I was mad that he wasn't a bigger part of that movie. He looked badass, and I wanted to know what was in his mind. Like why is he evil?
They don't really give him much character.
He's super one-dimensional.
He's just an eyeball.
Well, when he's in that suit of armor, it's pretty badass, but you only got to see like 30 seconds of it.
Yeah. Not much character development, though, Danny.
No, it's unfortunate.
Not much character development. So here's a film that I saw, and I recommend it to everyone. It's called Come and See. It's a World War II film. And it takes place. It's a Russian film. So it's in Russian, so you have to read subtitles.
You sent this to me actually. Yeah, you sent this.
It's on
to me.
YouTube. It's on YouTube. You just got to type in "Come and See."
Okay.
No, it's in color. It was made in the 80s, and it's about the German invasion of Belarus, and it's the film style that they have is like that 70s 80s like fly on the wall style, whatever the filmography name for it is. I think it's called like style noir or whatever it is, and it is like disturbing how realistic it seems. I recommend everyone watching it. It's like it really makes you think that you're there, and it's very, very dark. And I'm pretty sure as we were making jokes about Mel Gibson killing a horse, I was watching it with my friend who's in film. And he's like, they just killed a cow in that scene. Like they just literally got away with killing a cow. And it was a Russian film that was made in the 80s, so probably had a little bit more leeway to do stuff like that. But it was just like such a commitment to realism that it was just disturbing to watch it after. You just felt a little dirty after watching the film, or a little just like whoa.
Yeah, films like that. That one
film
that you mentioned, Beasts of No Nation, I remember watching that a couple of years ago. And when I got done with it, I just remember thinking, man, I have zero reason to complain. Like, zero.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to complain about like dropping your cell phone in the toilet when you see somebody being abducted and forced into a rebel army.
Bro, you got a cell phone and a toilet. They didn't have either.
To realize how good they have it.
It's like, dude, just the ability to drop it is like way more than they had. It's rough.
Not to mention most cell phones are waterproof now, so it's just like, oops.
Yeah, but films and storytelling is a way to really connect with characters like that we'd have no way to really imagine when you think about it. Like other than film and other than in stories, it's very hard to connect with somebody who's in like Syria right now, you know what I mean, or someone who's in some war-torn nation. So it's really cool when writers they prioritize and they try to build up that character and connect people together, because that's like, I guess that's the way that builds. That's the pathway to empathy, is when you can see somebody and someone's given character, despite them not being in your everyday vision. Because I mean, how often do we run into like a Syrian refugee or a Yemenis refugee or whatever? It's really cool, and it's really cool that you're concentrating on these stories, and your goal is to, continue writing historical fiction and going from the World War I era and now considering going into the 80s or Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which I think is a great topic. Like, are there any other time periods that you're interested in?
That Vietnam, probably World War II. So those eras. I know it sounds like real stereotypical, real common, but there's just so much material there. So
there's so much material.
probably one of those three, but who knows? Still doing research, still thinking.
The thing about World War II is that most storytellers, at least American storytellers, they
Yeah,
prioritize the American side of the story. So, they'll go like, all right, let's
right.
do something on D-Day, let's do something on Normandy, let's do something on Operation Garden, or whatever took place from the invasion from Normandy to the Elbe.
Yeah.
They'll concentrate on that side of the story, but I think a lot of Americans actually forget that there was a whole other side of the war on the Eastern Front. So there's so much opportunity to tell stories there. Of course, there's like the fronts in Japan and China and
China,
the Pacific, China. Yeah, I know the past 100 years. There's a lot. It's packed full of history to adapt into a story. So I'm sure you have a lot of sources.
Oh yeah,
for you.
A book that I'm going through right now. It's called Family of Four, and it's a story about this Scottish guy who fought for the British in the Second World War, got captured in Egypt by the Germans, and got sent to a prison camp in Italy. And while he was there was an escape attempt, and him and a couple guys got out. So he's this British dude in the middle of Italy, just roaming through the countryside, and he writes this whole story how he got adopted by this peasant family. And his whole story is amazing because you basically learn so much about a real specific time, like stuff that you would only learn if you were actually there. I think that's stuff that's super interesting. So, like a little tidbit that I got from it that I've just been thinking about, I know it sounds dorky as hell, but is the Italian peasants, when they cut their bread, they don't put it on the table like we do, and they don't take a slice out of it like that. They get the bread, they put it against their chest, and they go like this. So they cut towards them, which is crazy. And that's just the way they do it. So in writing a story, little things like that is just super interesting. And even if you're not coming at it from a writer's perspective or from a filmmaker's perspective, it's just interesting to have context about how different people do things all over the world. And there are people who are just like you and me who, just trying to live their lives right, but they still got bread and they got to cut it. So they do it a different way. I think it's super interesting. Right? Like,
that's
it's
so
crazy
weird.
to think about it. Yeah, like
sounds like an accident.
Like some
sounds
guy
like an
didn't
accident
have a
waiting to
table and he
happen.
was just like, screw it. Just started cutting it. But yeah.
I don't need a chest.
Fuck it. Yeah, those details is what makes things authentic. You know what I mean? Those small minor details where you hear the historian afterwards. You're like, yeah, they got that right. They did do that. They did cut their bread on their chest. Those small little details make the story a little bit more authentic. Do you plan on concentrating mostly on like writing novels and historical novels? Is there any other field or any other type of media that you'd ever want to try in the future?
I'm probably going to stick with either historical novels or psychological thrillers. One of those two. So a perfect example of something I'd like to write, like in the same like stratosphere, would be something like, God, I'm forgetting the movie. It has Bradley Cooper in it. Limitless. So something like that would be awesome. Like, that's one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite books. I think it's just such a really interesting dynamic as a story because you don't know what's real, and it's usually being told from the person who's telling it to you. So you don't know if they're telling you the truth. You don't kind of know what's up. But it's super interesting to read and super interesting to watch.
You can always combine a psychological thriller in a specific time period.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, I'm sure a lot of people throw out ideas at you. So something that I used to do. So my old roommate was a screenwriter.
Oh God.
So I used to barge into his room when I was like, he'd be sleeping.
Henry's pitches.
I'd be drunk or whatever, and I'd be like, I just got a brilliant idea, and I'd barge into I'll be like knocking on his door and like, hey Matt, I gotta talk to you. I'm like, all right, let me pitch you. Hear me out. there's two quarterbacks. One's a real son, one's a bastard son, and they meet in the Super Bowl. Like I'll just like say ridiculous ideas like that to see if anything sticks. But what was I? Oh yeah, here is me brainstorming. How about a psychological thriller about a guy who has war fatigue or shell shocked after World War I that takes place in like England or something like that?
That's legit. That's a good idea.
Even better, make it take place in Germany so that it's a part, like he has on top of the shell shock, he's also a part of the losing side.
But Danny, when it's adapted into a movie, no one wants to read subtitles. Come on, man.
They could just be speaking English. They could speak English with a German accent. What is wrong with that?
Yeah. Take a look at Inglourious Bastards, right? That movie's like 30% of it's in English. That movie, I love it and I hate it for the same reason, which is that it's got the accuracy of the languages, but at the same time you got to read like half the movie, so it's like getting a novel in at the same time. But
I'm a weeb. I watch anime, so I'm totally used to reading when I watch. So
speed reading,
an acquired habit.
Danny plays a lot of RPGs. The ones on PlayStation where they didn't start talking yet.
Danny owns about 12 katana.
But like anime, if you have a katana. Yeah. It's legit.
Yeah. I do have hair on my neck, hilarious. So does that make me a neckbeard too?
Yeah. I have no idea what that is.
Oh my God, you guys need to get on Reddit. Neckbeard it's like a slur. It's like against like dweeby, like nerdy fat dude in his mother's basement that watches anime and like I don't know, walks around with a samurai sword, and like they're called neckbeards because they have hair on their neck. I'm not entirely sure why they're called neckbeards, to be honest, but it's a thing. Now you know. Just call somebody a neckbeard.
Their laziness keeps them from shaving.
Probably. Well, that's pretty accurate for me. Yeah. I just do not shave.
You also have those Middle Eastern genes that help you out with the hair on the face, if you know what I mean.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Danny's half Palestinian. I don't know how many times I've mentioned that on the show. I know
it's been coming up a lot more recently too. It's like,
dude, that'd be like a great inside joke for the show. Just have like a little tally number up on like the top right corner of the screen, so people could see how many times.
Number of times Henry has mentioned the fact that I'm brown. The brown counter.
If you guys can't see, I'm giving you a chance to stop the episode now.
I think that's a good segue. But Adam, thanks so much for joining us today. The book is called Caravan. It should be out in the next couple of weeks. We'll definitely be linking it on our Facebook and other places. Any final parting words for our lovely audience, Adam?
History, man. These guys got a great podcast. They got a really good show, really good vibes. So keep on listening to them, man. They got a good thing going on. Thanks, man.
Adam, thank you. Nice words from a nice man. Your book, I can't wait for your book, dude. Anytime you want to be on, let us know. I appreciate it, brother.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Peace.
That was legit. Yeah, good
chat,
great,
man. That was fun. That was a lot of fun.